with Beth Tzedek All Access. I'm Rabbi Steve Warnick, one of the rabbis at Beth Tzedek. So happy to see you here with us on Facebook and on YouTube. Of course, if you want to participate in all of the many wonderful spiritual, meditative, learning, social activities that are available through Beth Tzedek All Access, just visit us on our website, www.beth-tzedec.org. We look forward to welcoming you. We welcomed this morning someone who's becoming a good friend, a member of our community, but also one of our leaders in our country. Please welcome Michael Levitt, Member of Parliament from the York Centre riding of Canada, of Toronto, leader of foreign, of a lot of the foreign affairs committees of Parliament and the interparliamentary coalitions and relationships that get built between Canada and other countries, and of course a leader also of the Liberal Party of Canada. Michael, welcome. It's so glad to have you here.
I almost don't want to interrupt you. I just keep going. Maybe we can spend 25 minutes doing that.
Right. What's the old joke? Is like, my mother was very happy to hear that. Certainly, who would have imagined 10, 11 weeks ago that we would be in this circumstance? And it's just been astonishing to watch not only how our country, but how other countries are responding to the pandemic. I thought we'd start with, what are you hearing from the people in your constituency, in your riding?
Yeah, you know what? It's been unprecedented times, Rabbi, as you've said, and I think we've seen incredible resiliency from Canadians writ large, and certainly that goes to people in my riding, the riding of York Centre, as you mentioned. It's been, people have really, when this began back in March, it's actually interesting. I was at APAC. I was down at APAC back in the very end of February. And it was, the very early days. We weren't yet concerned. We were aware of the growing pandemic, but there was no travel restrictions. We weren't yet as concerned about being in a large gathering. And of course, coming back from APAC, one of the Canadian contingent that had gone down actually got tested positive about 5 days after we got back, and that was a very rude awakening. In fact, there was a few days where I was also on quarantine from public health. They ended up releasing us because the degree of our exposure to the individual was not that high. Some people that were in his immediate group were locked down for 2 weeks. So resiliency, generosity, people just being utterly selfless throughout this situation. But I can tell you that close to home, the fears, the concerns have been very real. People have been very, very impacted. We just have to look at the plight of the frontline workers, whether it's the healthcare workers, the grocery store workers on the front lines, the transit employees, everybody that's really pulled together in those early stages to make sure that we could start getting through this. I also would point out the efforts, especially in our community, or the groups that have come out to support those that are most vulnerable. And I think this is something I would love to explore with you. But this pandemic has really shone a light on the most vulnerable groups in our society and the disproportionate impact that COVID is having on them, whether it be, women and in abusive situations who have faced many more challenges, whether it be seniors, isolated seniors in our own riding in York Centre, a huge population of Holocaust survivors. We've seen the work of organizations like Battelle Centre really step up to deliver much more support on the front lines, at B'nai B'rith as well with their food drive. We're seeing everybody coming together.
And yet it's very difficult. I mean, you mentioned seniors. I know that one of the things that we've been doing at Beth Tzedek is we've been identifying people in our community that are vulnerable, and we've been reaching out to them, working to make sure that they were connected to the resources that they needed in order to do well. One of the things that we've really encountered is, first and foremost, loneliness, especially amongst older seniors who are living alone to begin with, and really feeling trapped within their homes and have very little services. And so we have a group of people that are just calling them on a regular basis to check in and to chat, so that they've got someone to talk to. We've also found that people who have specialized medical needs, like diabetics, for example,
Yeah.
The services, both in the Jewish community and the larger community, is difficult for them to do specific shopping. Right? They much rather prefer to say, like, here's the box of what we're buying, and if you need it, we'll drop it off. But if you're a diabetic and you need low sugar, low fat, diabetic types of food, as well as specialty drinks and so forth, it's a lot harder to provide them with those services. And you also mentioned about seniors in terms of being vulnerable. I read a statistic the other day that over 80% of all the COVID deaths have been in nursing homes or assisted living homes, and
it's a nightmare. So in York Center, I've got several. I've got a couple of smaller long-term care and nursing homes, and then I have Downsview long-term care. And Downsview long-term care has had, at last report, because the province put it under formal management by Humber River Hospital about 3 weeks ago, and the numbers sort of had been coming daily. But at that point, the administration of the facility is being handled now by Humber River, who are doing a fantastic job. But we had close to 60, and this is 3 weeks ago, close to 60 seniors that had died in that facility. One PSW that had been there for over 20 years, who Ms. Roberts, who died in that facility, and the efforts by all involved, the support workers, the doctors at Humber River, everybody that's come together to try and minimize the ongoing impact in that facility. It has been, we're going to have to all give a long, hard look to how we deal with this issue moving forward. Jurisdictionally, it's complicated, but I've been incredibly proud that the armed forces have also had to go in, not to Downsview, but to, I think, 5 or 6 facilities in and around the GTA. I was speaking with my colleague Anthony Housefather in Montreal yesterday, and the armed forces, I believe, have just gone into a couple of the more facilities in Montreal. I think as some of them are getting cleared up, others are still languishing, and the support is required. So this is going to be work for us to do in the future. Look at how we can be better providing safety for people in their retirement years. And I heard a very interesting quote a few weeks ago. It's not just about adding years to the life, it's about adding life to the years. And I think that's an important thing that we have to consider. It's not about locking these places down and restricting them. I mean, the stories of seniors who are struggling through all of this and are absolutely cut off from their families is really gut-wrenching. We know that the impacts emotionally on families, whether it's families dealing with bereavement, families dealing with parents who are in facilities, people who are in the hospital system. I mean, it's really it's been a wake-up call, and it's something we're all going to have to kind of work collaboratively as a society. It's not about any one group or one level. It's as a society, we're going to have to give a rethink on how we choose to protect our seniors, especially the ones that require the care.
Can you explain some of those jurisdictional issues to me? So as I understand it, the province is primarily responsible for healthcare. And so for the province to have taken over some of these private assisted living facilities makes sense within that. What's the federal government's role, and how did it would seem that like the army, the military is under the federal government jurisdiction, but yet they went in to provide support. And I'm just, as someone who's only been here for about 15 months, I'm just trying to understand that.
Sure, and it's complicated. Let's face it. So you're not alone. The issue of jurisdictionality comes up all the time. It came up frequently prior to COVID. You know, when I'm out at events with constituents, my colleagues, James Pasternak, the city councillor, and Roman Baber, the provincial member of provincial parliament, we talk about this often. People don't distinguish. So if I go to a door to say hello, you know, they'll ask me about their garbage. They'll ask James about education, which is a provincial mandate, and they'll ask Roman about taxes, right? So people don't differentiate, but it's become a much more significant issue as a result of the pandemic, because you've got these different levels functioning. I think we're all waiting for announcements today from the Ford government, from our provincial government, about the implications for Toronto moving forward on reopening, which of course is a municipal element there, and the federal element. You know, public health is transcending all of these levels. To the specific question you asked, yes, the mandate for long-term care is with the provincial government. They handle the inspections and the checks and the overall sort of framework that they operate under, whether they be private or public. The city actually has a number of long-term care facilities, so they're involved, you know, with a number of the facilities as well, and also a number of the inspections mechanisms that go on. The federal government, we write a lot of the checks, so we're making the health transfer payments to the province. And of course, part of that is going towards long-term care. Particularly on this issue of the military going in, the provincial government asked. So the provincial government made the ask to the federal government of assistance, and in particular of the armed forces assistance. Quebec and Ontario specifically. I forget if there was other provinces too, but I think it was Quebec and Ontario. And of course, Minister Sajjan approved the request, and there has been several teams operating, and hundreds and hundreds of troops operating, of armed forces members operating in this particular role. But it speaks to a bigger issue, and that is, I want to give a shout out to our political leadership, to the PM, to Premier Ford, to Mayor Tory, as we sit in Toronto, because the way they have managed to interact, the way that public health agencies have worked across jurisdictional boundaries, we've seen it from the provinces. Canada's federal network and framework is complicated on a good day, but we've seen a tremendous amount of cooperation and collaboration as a result of necessity. It was necessary. It had to happen. And when I look at the way the almost constant contact between ministers, provincial, federal, city leadership, I think as Canadians, we can sit back, look around the world at different situations and say to ourselves, man, in a crisis, people pulled together. Is there things that can be done better? Hindsight, et cetera, at all levels? Of course there is. But when we go and we look at this, we got to say our governments at all levels work together in the best interest of Canadians. And I'm proud of our mayor, our premier, and our PM.
So that's one of the things that I've been really interested in, as you know, I don't know how many people watching know. I mean, I'm an American, though I did grow up in Winnipeg. My father was a rabbi, Char Tzedek in Winnipeg. Woohoo! For anybody who's watching from Winnipeg. And so I was there for junior high and high school. And so coming back to Canada from the United States only in the last year plus, it's really been astonishing to see the level of cooperation between all levels of government. And I think it says something to Canadian values and Canadian society, that the leaders are putting people first and are really trying hard to solve the problems. And yet, one of the other things that I'm reading in the national newspapers anyway, is a concern that in this crisis that perhaps Parliament is not doing a good enough job with some of its oversight responsibilities for the government as it relates to the question period, as it relates to Parliament not meeting on a regular basis and being pushed off into the fall. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your perspectives are as a member of Parliament?
Sure, absolutely. We're living in exceptional times, and I think there's been broad agreement on the need to focus on the response to COVID. I mean, I know that what I'm getting in my writing, I mean, it's the amount of outreach from constituents in terms of their concerns right from day one. How are we going to handle this? What are we going to do? I mean, let's look, for example, at the creation of the CERB, the emergency response benefit. There was a program that, with all party approval, got up and running within a matter of weeks. The enormity of the number of people that were in need of CERB, you know, millions and millions, tens of millions. I forget what the last number was, maybe 30 million, but the number of individuals that were requiring access to this support benefit in the early days, this required an all hands on deck approach from the government, from the opposition parties, because they all understood that we needed to be there to provide that relief. And I can tell you that the day that program, there had been talk about it for about a week to 10 days. You know, there was the legislation was kind of back and forth. It got approved. From the time that it got approved and the first applications went in, within 3 days, Canadians were getting the first payments in their bank account. I can tell you that in York Centre, there was a palpable sigh of relief from families when that money arrived. By the way, I see your dog in the background there.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully you have a dog.
I do.
But
otherwise somebody's just visiting.
there was a palpable sigh of relief from families that didn't know how they were going to put food on the table. And that's not easy. The fact that that CRA was able to turn around and get the monies out. I mean, I want to give a real tip of the hat to the bureaucrats, to the civil service that has really understood the needs of Canadians in terms of moving this forward. I think we've seen a number of those over the last weeks. So we've seen it in relation to the wage subsidy. Again, huge impact locally. I've got small business, I've got medium-sized business, I've got large bit, and all of them have been impacted by COVID. So Parliament's focus has been on getting those programs through and out. In terms of the day-to-day functioning, I'm an MP. I strongly believe in the voice of parliamentarians and being able to reflect back our constituents' thoughts. I'm spending my days doing outreach to local business groups, local constituents. I mean, I've had 3 calls already this morning on a range of issues, some international, some domestic. But all of people expressing, how can we improve this? This is my situation. Was this the intent of this particular part of one of the relief programs, etc. We need to be working together with opposition, and I know it can be a struggle. But I think as we move forward, there's daily question periods, although they're in this special COVID committee. I also understand they've added, there's 4 additional sessions added over the summer because this is going to continue to be a live issue. On the issue of parliamentary oversight, the government continues to be answering questions daily. Can more be done? Listen, I'd really like us to find a way, while respecting the public health guidances and mandates that are out there, because obviously, listen, Parliament is 338 MPs coming from every corner of the country, and then we gather, we meet with lots of people, and then we go back again, right? We're massive vectors for the spread of the spread of information or the spread of something more nefarious in this case, right? I would really like to see, and I know that there's the parliamentary committees, and by the way, there's a number of the parliamentary committees that are operating at the moment, that are primarily the ones focused on COVID or the House response. So you've got health and finance that are meeting. They're hearing from witnesses. You've got the House Procedures Committee, which is doing the same. What I'd really like to see, and I don't know, I know that the House has been looking at this, the House bureaucracy has been looking at it, the availability of us all to be able to vote and debate on items moving forward. I think the smaller sittings of Parliament give voice primarily to the other than doing statements in the House and that sort of thing. They give the MPs that are there participating are the ones that are in proximity, or maybe within an hour or an hour and a half in our case, from Parliament. I'd like to see a formal voting be able to be done virtually, so that certainly when the House starts back up, if we're not able to all join together, and I'm not at all sure that we are going to be able to have 338 MPs back in the fall. We're going to have to wait and see what the public health advice is. But if we can't, I'd like to see a full resumption, but I'd also like us to be able to vote and expand the range of things we can do virtually.
So you mentioned international affairs. This is a short program, so we're going to keep moving forward. When it comes to foreign affairs, these seem to be like very challenging times for many nations, but especially for Canada. From your perspective and the work that you're doing in Parliament and with foreign affairs committees and other parliaments from around the world, what do you see as Canada's emerging priorities, and tell us a little bit about what the work is that you're doing with regard to that.
Sure. So I think the big takeaway from for me from the last couple of months in terms of what's happening globally is the need for Canada to double down on being collaborative internationally. In the aftermath and during this pandemic, we've seen Canada working cooperatively with our allies, with our friends and allies. And I think we've also seen some countries looking more inward, some of the traditional powers looking more inward, kind of hunkering down. I think it's really, really important that Canada continues to take an international approach, continues to rely and work with allies. We're seeing that in a range of places. We're seeing it at the United Nations. We're seeing it at NATO. We're seeing it with non-traditional groups like the working group the foreign minister has created with 13 other countries on COVID. So they're doing ministerial Zoom or whatever medium they're using, chats and discussions. We're seeing these sort of different coalescing of allies coming together. I think as we get into the next phase of this, which will be an assessment of lessons learned, we need to look at, for example, the public health response globally. I know there's been questions around the WHO. I know there's been questions around the China issue as it relates to the WHO and the kind of the role of the Chinese government there. We need to be able to rely on our allies to be able to move that work forward. It's very, very important. And I think it's something that I'm hearing. I'm spending, part of my time reaching out and engaging with the ambassadors from around the world that are in Canada. Obviously, they're separated, they're away from their homes. And I think there's really a shared understanding that the international dynamic is going to be a major one. I think that we've seen, I myself, you talked about priorities. One issue, and I was just on a call on this morning with an advocacy group, and that was on the issue of Hong Kong. So great concern in recent weeks about the new national security law that's being put forward by the Chinese government in Beijing and its implications on freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. So let's use that as a case study for how this international approach is working. So we saw in the aftermath of that announcement from the Chinese government, we saw the foreign ministers of the US, the UK, Australia, and Canada come together to issue a really a strong statement in terms of concern and support for democracy in Hong Kong. Additionally, I had an opportunity to work with fellow chairs of foreign affairs committees on an initiative that we put forward last week, maybe a week and a half ago now, where I was joined by my colleague from Australia, Senator David Fawcett, Simon O'Connor, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in New Zealand, Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the United Kingdom, and we joined together with a letter to Secretary General Gutierrez for the United Nations, but also to our individual prime ministers, asking for support in the UN's adoption of a special envoy on human rights in Hong Kong. Somebody that can actually be on the ground tracking this. The ask, I think, is important, and I think it's a strong one, but the way we're going about it, again, coalescing of like-minded allies, there is strength in numbers. And I think as we move into this new phase, where again, we're seeing certain traditional kind of global powers pulling back a little, all the more important that we're working with our allies, whether in Europe or Australia, New Zealand, etc., working with like-minded democracies to push for these types of issues to be brought to the forefront.
Thank you for that answer. And of course, there's lots going on with China and Canada, and we hope that the issues around the CFO who's been detained because of treaties with the United States, as well as the Canadians that are being held in China, gets resolved soon, and that those Canadians get home as quickly as possible.
And just on the issue of the two Michaels, because it is such an important one. This is entirely another example where having strength in numbers, having loud voices, we continue to call out the arbitrary detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor and the other Canadians that are also being held by the Chinese government. But there is no doubt, and I've spent the last 2 years when we've been traveling, raising awareness and asking our allies to join us in calling that situation out. Very, very important. Whether it's in Iran and the treatment of the Baha'i, whether it's again the two Michaels, lots of jurisdictions where we need to have democratic nations speaking out for rule of law and the rules-based order, and I think that's going to be a real focus as we move forward.
Thank you. Of course, we can't talk about foreign affairs and the Jewish community without talking about Israel. Sure. Share with us some of the work that you're doing with your committee, with Israel, with the Knesset, and what is it that we hope for Canada vis-a-vis Israel in the future?
Sure. So I've been really proud and honored to serve as the chair of the Canada-Israel Parliamentary Friendship Group since I was elected, really, back in 2015. Over that time, we've really seen an establishing and a bonding across party lines in Canadian Parliament on the Canada-Israel relationship. We've worked very, very closely with our counterparts in the Knesset. We've had a number of visits. I think I've been to Israel. It's a number of times. We've had a number of ministerial visits, and in fact, I was just there with an all-party delegation back in January before the world changed. I was there with the Governor General and representatives from the other opposition parties in the Canadian Parliament for the Auschwitz 75 anniversary in both Jerusalem and in Krakow. I think we continue. I believe that the multi-party consensus on Israel is extremely, extremely important. There's always going to be challenges, but there's also always opportunities. So we've seen a growth in the innovation agenda, in the public safety agenda, lots of collaboration between Canada and Israel. And we know Israel is the startup nation. We also know that it's incredibly important that from a Jewish community perspective, this is an important issue for the community. They want to know that that Canada and Israel are working collaboratively. There's always there's certainly that dynamic, but we know there's also the potential ahead for for concern and for blips on the horizon that will need to be addressed. So I'm going to continue reaching out as the chair of the friendship group on a range of issues. But as we approach July, we know that there may be some challenging times ahead, and we're going to have to work through those. We're going to have to be communicative, but we're also going to have to continue to deal with issues as they arise.
One last question, Michael, and it has to also do with who my guest will be next week. This is a question that comes to us from the public as we've been talking. With Chief Saunders retiring, with all the talk that's going on about Black Lives Matter, all the action and the protests that we're seeing south of the border, but also the awareness that has raised even here in Canada of systemic racism and racialization within the police force. What are some of the things that you'd like to see happen in Canada, both with regard to the RCMP as well as local police forces, that would move Canada further along in addressing these issues?
I think that the first thing that is so important is an acknowledgement that systemic racism exists in our country. And I think we've heard that loud and clear from the Prime Minister and from political leadership. It's important. It's important to be able to accept and understand. I think personally, let me speak a little bit about the sort of the formal government response. But I have a large Black and racialized community in York Centre, and we very much live in a world. I mean, prior to being the member of Parliament and actually going into the community and broadening my horizons and sitting down and listening and understanding, you don't always understand the challenges. And it's not my lived experience. I haven't lived that racism. I haven't lived the concern about going to the grocery store or going out for a drive late one night and getting pulled over. I haven't lived the fear that many Black parents have about when their kids go out to shoot hoops or go to the mall, that they feel. I haven't lived that concern. But what I must do is listen. I must commit to listen, understand, and be an ally. And I think that is incredibly important. Over the last number of years, that is exactly what I have tried to do, because it is so critical. And I think in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, and what we're seeing flaring up, not just in the US, but also in Canada, we must acknowledge, we must validate, and we must stand as allies. And I think as a Jewish community, I've been proud to see that happening. I've been proud to see it happening both institutionally, but also on social media and individually. Again, that act of listening and that act of compassion and understanding, and then in my case, as a member of Parliament, it's my obligation to seek guidance from the community. I reach out a lot to, for example, Greg Fergus, who is an MP in the Liberal caucus. He heads up the Black caucus, and I'm listening to him. I'm hearing when he talks about the type of change that is required, and the type of actions that you talked about in law enforcement. But it's within the civil service writ large. The lack of proportionality around Black and racialized Canadians in roles of leadership must be addressed within the federal bureaucracy, and in other in other places too. We have to commit to doing this, and I think again, I always take a step back, because the voices that have lived it must lead this charge, but they need allies, and they need allies to stand up and say, we're hearing, we understand, and we're here to support you. think that's the most important thing we can do. And again, I've been proud of the Jewish community, because we do have that commitment. We've always had the commitment, tikkun olam, to stand up, to try to heal where we can. So I've been very active with, for example, interfaith dialogues in York Center that we've had running now for a number of years. And I think we have to continue to do that kind of work. I've got a youth council in York Center, and we've had meetings specifically focused on hearing from Black and racialized youth in the constituency, and understanding what we can be doing better, how we can support them. And what I can do is say, yeah, that is my commitment to them and to that community in my riding. And I think it's really, really important that we use what's happening now around the world to really push for change. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think the fact that we're seeing the acknowledgement from the very top levels down, it needs to be more than just talking. It needs to be action.
Thank you, Michael, and Bahatzacha, continued good luck in bringing these ideas and these values to the Parliament and to the policies and legislation of Canada, so that we can continue to live our values. On the topic that we just concluded, let me just share with everybody that next Shabbat will be Bet Tzedek, Inclusion Shabbat for the LGBTQ community as part of our celebration of Pride Month. We hope that you'll join us 6 p.m. with Aviva Turnick and friends for a Freilich Kabbalat Shabbat. And then at 9:30, we live stream from our webpage, from the Daily Services page of Beth Tzedek, www.beth-tzedek.org. That's 9:30 on Shabbat morning, and my sermon comments will be relating to Pride Month and the Torah portion. And then next Monday at 12:30, join us for our next Conversations Over Coffee with Andre Ivory, who is a person of color and a Jew of color, someone who's known to us at Beth Tzedek about a decade ago. He was here as one of our youth directors and did other work within the synagogue. He's now in Phoenix, Arizona as a director of religious education at a Reform synagogue. And we look forward to welcome him back virtually, at least, to our community to talk about the issues of being a person of color, but specifically a Jew of color, and how synagogue communities and Jewish institutions can do a better job of listening and welcoming, and also advocacy on behalf of those that are marginalized in our communities. Our guest today was Michael Levitt, MP of York Center. Thank you, Michael, again.
And Beth Tzedek, and longtime Beth
and
Tzedek.
a longtime Beth Tzedek member too. A longtime Beth Tzedek member and an active member of our community as well. So thank you again, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a wonderful